Good evening and welcome to the Arundel Camera Club virtual live stream for Thursday, February 24th, 2022. My name is John Milliker and I'm club president for the 2021-2022 season. The Arundel Camera Club was founded in 1957. It exists to promote the art, science, and education in all aspects and fields of photography. For more information about us, please visit www.arundelcameraclub.org. Thank you for joining us on our virtual live stream. With the help of our members and officers, we've made the tough decision to stay virtual until the end of our club year and start back hybrid in September. Before tonight's program, here is our program's chair, Christine Milliker, with our upcoming schedule.
Good evening. On March 3rd, there is going to be a photo share and discuss. Ron will get an email out later this week, I hope. And then on March 10th, we have yet to be determined, but I will have a good program set up for us. On March 17th is our digital contest. The theme is open. And on March 24th, we have a program by Joseph de
I'm going to say De Pasquale.
Sorry, on the Hubble telescope.
Okay, I have a couple things. You've changed some things around on me, you and Ron,
sorry.
but that's okay because I put the wrong thing up on our screen. But that sounds like a good time. Do we have more on this Hubble telescope talk?
That's what I have for right now, without my notes being in front of me on that.
That's great. That looks great.
But tonight we have Steve Sattler, the president of the MPA, here to speak with us. Welcome, Steve.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's a great pleasure to be here. I think the last time I spoke with the Arundel Camera Club, boy, I'm not good on years. It was many years ago, and I think 2 high schools ago when you guys were meeting in the old high school. But thank you, John and Christine, for having me tonight. So let me jump into my screen share. All right, and you guys can see my screen?
Yes.
All right, perfect. And tonight what I'd like to go over is, I'll give you a little background of myself in photography and then get into the meat of focus stacking. It's really a wonderful creative technique I've been doing for many years, and I hope I can entice some of you to try it out. So we'll talk about what is focus stacking, when to use it, talk about the 3 stages of focus stacking, and then I'm going to give you a demonstration in both Photoshop and Helicon software so you get a little variety. And then we'll talk about some software options as well and some limitations. We're going to save questions to the very end. And I'm also going to weave in a little bit of HDR because the techniques are very similar. So my background in photography, my parents gave both my brother and I cameras since I was 8 years old. And one year at summer camp, they had a photo contest. And lo and behold, I ended up winning the contest. And it was a picture of a duck. And I was trying to find that picture because I still have it here in the house somewhere. And it's the most horrible picture of a duck ever. So it wasn't so much I took good pictures. I think it was the other kids in camp were just horrible photographers. So I snapped pictures for many, many years. When I went to college in Boston, I met who was going to become my first wife. And she had many good qualities about her, one of which was that Yashica 35 millimeter camera that she had that became my possession. And I shot it for many, many years in Boston. Among my friends, I was the photographer, so I cataloged everybody. And I should note that my first wife also had some bad qualities about her. And when we divorced, she took, I didn't mind losing her as much as that 35 millimeter Yashica camera. So for about 6 months, I didn't have a camera. And my brother said, hey, he was in Baltimore, I was in Boston. And he said, let's meet in Atlantic City for a brother's weekend. So I drove down, and I'm not a big gambler, but I think the stars were in alignment that day. And I won like $500 on the blackjack table. And the first thing I did with it was to buy what you see me holding in that picture, which was a Canon AE1 camera. And I bought that in 1981 and used it until 2004, which was 23 years, until I bought my first digital camera, which was a Nikon D200. I was waiting and waiting for the price of a decent digital camera to come down before making the purchase. And I still have that camera today. Every, I don't know, year or so, I get a roll of film and I still shoot some film, not much, because I love digital cameras. Then I started joining some clubs around 2010. And the first club I joined, along with Ron Pfeiffer, ended up being the co-founder of the old Baltimore HDR Club, which some of you may remember. And you might remember Reb Oral, who actually founded the club. And there were 6 or 7 of us in the basement of his house. HDR was pretty hot back in those days. Not many folks were using it. So we thought it would be a nice niche. And it was. I also joined around the same time the Harford County Photography Group. And after a few years, I became president of that club and ran it for about 4 years, and also became members during the succeeding years with the Creative Exposure of Baltimore Club, which met in the Museum of Industry. That was a great experience. That club is now the Charm City Photo Club. It's a wonderful club you guys should check out as well. And the fourth club I joined was the Baltimore Camera Club, which is a great club. And then I started entering contests. I was very reluctant. The only club I compete in today is the Baltimore Camera Club. And they have such wonderful photographers there that how I ended up currently in the top 5 of all photographers in the club in the unlimited digital group. I still don't know how I have achieved that. And 4 of the images you'll see tonight in the slideshow were award winners, and they're focus stacked images. So you'll see those tonight as well. Um, I'm not formally trained as a photographer, really self-taught. I've attended as many seminars as I can. I would travel to New Jersey and Pennsylvania and Nature Visions down in Northern Virginia. I'd watch as many YouTubes as I can. I've grown a collection of photography books on specific photographers. I've have like 156 books on different photographers now, and took courses with lynda.com and Creative Live and Kelby and all of that. And in 2017, I became one of the co-founders of the Maryland Photography Alliance, which most of you know, and have been very proud to serve as president since we launched the group. And the picture at the bottom, when I think about my photography journey, probably the most rewarding experience in that journey is working with a charitable group called Flashes of Hope. And the kids have cancer, and they look for volunteer photographers to go into hospitals to shoot portraits of the kids. But for 4 or 5 years at summer camps, I've had the honor of shooting these kids, and they really give you so much strength. So it's been one of the most rewarding experiences. I talked about the Baltimore HDR Club. It was very unique. HDR allows you, as you know, to take pictures like you see here, where the dynamic range goes from a very dark environment, like the inside of this covered bridge in Lancaster County, and to get all the detail as well. And I really wanted to, in a way, talk about HDR and focus stacking tonight because they're very, very similar. The capture processes of making the images are very similar. The workflow processes on the back end are very similar as well. And both are tools, in my opinion, for your bag of creativity tricks in designing your images. So, today HDR really isn't needed as much as it was back then because today's newer cameras have newer sensors that can really capture a wider dynamic range. So I hardly use it today for what I used to use it. HDR to me today helps create a unique look and feel to the pictures, which appeals to me a great deal. And I use it to create that aesthetic look. So a few HDR images, the old Lana Conning silk mill, which is no longer here, allowed you to take a picture like this where you could capture the detail in the windows and underneath the machines and the stack of trays in the back there. Inside the National Cathedral, where you can capture really the details in the upper left-hand corner of the screen, which was lower light, and in the upper portions of the arches as well. If you've never been to this National Building Museum in DC, it's really wonderful architecture on the inside, but HDR allowed me to capture and create kind of a unique image like you see here. The look and feel is just totally different than a straight image out of the camera. And Eastern State Penitentiary, I'm sure most of you folks have been up there. The image on the left was captured with 5 images, and the one on the right of the barber chair was 3 images, a very unique look. So most of the images are on the inside. This one's no different. Huntington Island Lighthouse in Georgia. Um, for that one, I actually laid on my back inside the lighthouse shooting up, and 5 shots allowed me to merge them in software to create and capture the detail in a very low light situation. And the Tybee Island Light Station, which is in Georgia also, I think. Actually, Huntington Island's in South Carolina and Tybee Island's in Georgia. That's the steps of the lighthouse going up, and the orange, which is a special effect I put on the picture, is actually the wall of the lighthouse. My wife and I travel quite a bit, and this image was created in Spain. Again, has kind of a unique look to it that you wouldn't get out of the state right out of the camera. This was taken with 3 images too. And the last HDR one, I think, was Venice. My wife and I have been there about 4 or 5 times now, and I actually went back one of those times because this location really appealed to me. But I didn't have a wide enough angle lens to kind of get the look and feel that I wanted. But that's the type of image you could create with HDR. And I guess I have a couple of more in Boston, Beacon Hill on the left, and Door County, where we've gone for family reunions for about 25 years now, which is located in Wisconsin. Both of these are 3 image shots. And this is the last one. HDR is really great for textures like the peeling paint in an old factory that's dilapidated. And near my home here in Harford County on the Susquehanna, it's the Rock Run Grist Mill. So HDR is great for industrial shots as well. And that particular image appeared on the cover of the Harford County Library magazine one month.
Quick question, quick comment, Steve. Can you hit hide on the bottom of your screen so that we don't get the message?
Thank you.
Thank you.
It hasn't blocked anything yet, but let's clean that up. Perfect. Thanks,
All right.
bud.
Thank you so much. So the Baltimore HDR Club started with HDR, and we became more of a multi-image processing club. So we went into panoramas. And then after panoramas, which quite frankly, I'm not a big panorama guy, but I really got into focus stacking because around the time we were getting into it, I got my first macro lens, which I still have today, which is a Tamron 90 millimeter 2.8, which is sharp as sharp can be for my purposes. And it was really, my wife and I joined Longwood Gardens around that same time. So you're going to see a lot of flower pictures in a second, but it was really focus stacking and Longwood Gardens that allowed me to be invited to exhibit my focus stacked images at a gallery show in Roland Park in Baltimore in 2014. And for me, that was quite an honor because can't say I've had a lot of confidence back then in photography or my own capabilities, but being invited to do that gallery show really helped my confidence grow. And it was really only because, in my opinion, only because of focus stacking and the look and the detail that you can get out of these images, like the following. Now, I'm going to show you this one, which I absolutely hate now, but this was one of my early focus stacked images. I don't like the composition. The stamen in this area here is intersecting with these stems. So compositionally, it's horrible. It's probably too sharp on the leaves, but I got the detail that I wanted on these stamens all over the picture, which is what focus stacking can do. And I was probably in a crazy photography phase back then because these green areas weren't part of the original picture. It showed a background which didn't really complement the picture. So in Photoshop, I kind of painted in this green to make the yellow and the stamens pop. Another shot from Longwood Gardens is again one I'm not real fond of, but the technique of focus stacking to allow you to get this type of sharpness. And you might think, well, what's the big deal about it? Um, with when you're shooting macro and you're getting real close to your subject, the depth of field is really small. So it's very difficult to get sharpness throughout the image. And you might be thinking, well, the background's not sharp on this one. Well, that's a creative decision. When I originally shot this image, I shot enough pictures to make the back sharp if I wanted to, but in processing them, the look and feel I wanted of the picture, I wanted it blurry so that everything else would pop off the page like it does here. But again, this isn't one of my fond ones either. This one at Longwood, um, the depth isn't that great, but the curvature of the leaves makes it a challenge in macro photography to get everything sharp. And again, everything isn't sharp in the background, which is another creative decision that I made. When I do some focus stacking images, everything could be sharp in my workflow, but I may actually use the blur tool sometimes to blur certain portions of an image out to make the things I really want sharp to pop off the page. And this one was no exception. So I've got a little sharpness here down at the bottom, but I manually blurred this in post because it was just too sharp for me to give me the look that I wanted. So I was getting a little bit better over time with the focus stacking. These are still some of my earlier images, but I felt I was starting to get the control of what I wanted sharp in the image. Um, Again, when something is this close in the front to the lens, it's a challenge when you're that close to get the back sharp. So multiple images in focus stacking will allow you to do that. And at Longwood, I fell in love with these blue poppies, and they've won quite a few awards for me, not this particular one. This image, compositionally, I like quite a bit. These little stamens here aren't as sharp as my later focus stacking images were, so I was getting closer and closer. But with focus stacking, I could get the stems back here sharp. I starting to get the sharpness here a little bit better. The sharpness of these stamens is here. That's what focus stacking can do. It's a creative tool. It's not for every picture. It's not for every setting or subject, but it's just something you should be conscious of. So here are some of what I consider to be my better images. Many of these were in the gallery show that I was invited to. Um, and I probably used the wrong terms because I don't know the right terms for all the flowers, but let's say this is the stamen. Well, this is closer to me as a photographer than these lower back areas here that I couldn't get sharp in one image. So I would shoot multiple shots to create this particular image. So when you're thinking of focus stacking, it's not just getting it sharp. All the other bits of knowledge you guys have about composition and where to place certain elements in a scene are very important as well. I knew when I shot this image in focus stacking at Longwood that it would be somewhat of a challenge, but as you can see how sharp, again, probably not the right term, but the hairs of this stamen are here. But I knew when I shot this, I wanted this area in yellow in the back to be tack sharp, because if it was tack sharp, I knew I could get your eyes to travel there, and the real estate of you looking at this picture would be enhanced. And I also knew when I shot this picture that the edges of your subject are very important too. And we'll talk about the technique of how to actually do that. Another Poppy, this was a first place winner at the Baltimore Camera Club. And this was probably, and I didn't go back to check, but I'm guessing this was like a 17 or 18 shot focus stack, because all these stamens are at different distances from the camera. This green is different back here. So there I am turning the ring on my lens to try to get certain areas and certain stamens sharp. And we'll talk about that technique too. So sometimes focus stacking can be as few as 2, or some folks have told me they've shot 30 plus images for focus stacking. And I'll just go through these. Now this one I wasn't quite sure if I really needed to focus stack, because the depth from the back leaves really isn't that great from the leaves at the top. However, once you learn the focus stacking technique, shooting 1, 2, 3 images is very quick. The post-processing is very quick. And I knew what type of look I wanted for this particular image compositionally, and I did want everything tack sharp in it. So why not take 2 or 3 shots at different focus distances if it's that easy and that quick to do? And that's what I did here, and it ended up being a shot I actually like a lot. In post, by the way, I also changed this background at the bottom to black to make the red pop a little bit more. So again, just a creative touch. So all right, enough with the flowers. All Sattler's talking about is focus stacking and flowers, but focus stacking can also be used for a variety of other subjects. Now, there's a auto junkyard on the way to Longwood Gardens. If you're taking Route 1, I'm sure many of you have done that. And once you cross into the Pennsylvania line, and this junkyard's off to the left somewhere. Now, the challenge here was I was very close to this knob on the light switch, but I wasn't getting the clarity or sharpness of the texture in the upper right-hand corner, or back in this area where I presume this may have been a cigarette lighter here. And even this 60 here, for whatever reason, I wasn't getting as sharp. So 3 shots merged gives me a nice looking image like this, different. This is in the same auto junkyard, peeling metal off the side of a car. Now, again, I'm very, very close to the surface, the red and these blue spots here, but this peeling piece of metal is curved up. It's an increased distance for me to get the edge tack sharp. I needed to shoot multiple images. I believe this was a 3 shot also, and I was cognizant of trying to get the edges in the upper right-hand corner sharp, as well as the blue in this area too. I wanted sharp. So 3 shots. Another one from that same car. And again, the challenge here is I'm so close to this particular headlight knob. And it was interesting, the knobs back in those days too, to get the upper right-hand corner as sharp. The depth wasn't that great, but again, with macro photography and being that close to the subject, 2 shots on this particular one. And this one, very close to a pocket watch, but the depth of looking at some of the gears, trying to get these gears down here real sharp, 2 shots. And also landscapes. This picture was taken in Ischia, which is in Italy. But to get these rocks sharp and to get the sharpness in the castle on the island and to give me the leading lines that I wanted to put the rocks there. So 3 shots, 1 for the front, one in the middle, and one in the back. Very simple. So again, focus stacking, what is it? You guys probably know it. The definition is that focus stacking is known by or called many different things. I always call it focus stacking. Some folks call it focal plane merging or Z stacking. And you hear focus blending a lot because that's one of the stages of focus stacking is blending we'll talk about. But focus stacking is a digital image processing techniques which combines multiple images taken at different focus distances, giving you a resulting image with a greater depth of field than any of the individual source images can give you. So it increases your depth of field that you couldn't get any other way. And it can be used in a lot of different situations. Mostly, in my opinion, people use it for macro or optical microscopy. And I use it infrequently, but in the right situation, since I do a lot of landscape photography, I can usually get what I want in a couple of shots, 3 at the most for landscape. Again, why not if it gives you the sharpness that you want? So it's a powerful technique for extending a photo's depth of field. Again, used mostly in close-up and macro photography because the lens's highest f-stop is usually insufficient to give you everything you want to get the focus. And also, you may be familiar with lens diffraction. When you go to an whatever 22 or 32, it's a smaller hole in the aperture, and just optics, when light's coming into a smaller f-stop like that, light's going to start bending, and diffraction will cause some softness in the image. So instead of stopping down to f22 or 32, focus stacking can keep everything sharp with no diffraction. So when should you use it? While it's a incredibly powerful technique that I do recommend you at least learn and try to have it in your bag of tricks, it's really not always necessary, and a majority of your shots won't be needed, but it should be in the back of your mind to use for the right scenario, such as photographing a scene like landscapes with a great distance between foreground rocks or carts, or flowers in the foreground with the mountains in the background. When you're using an ultra wide angle lens and you're very, very close to the subject, focus stacking can help there. And when you're zooming in on a lens, obviously when you start zooming in, your depth of field starts reducing. It can help you there as well. And of course, macro photography again. There's 3 stages to doing focus stacking. One is capturing the images, and we'll talk about that a little bit. And the next 2 will really demonstrate, but the 3 stages are, you've got to get the multiple images, and there's a variety of techniques to do that. And then you have to align those images and really line up the pixels, because when you start changing the ring on your lens, when you start changing the focus distance, it causes the misalignment from one image to the next. So by aligning, it lines everything up to do the blending process, which is the third part. And the blending process I always like to keep simple, because in software, when you're blending, it's just picking the sharpest pixels off of each of the images you've taken, and that's what ends up in the final image to give you all the sharpness that you want. So let's talk about capturing the images. So let's start off with a little tip that we learned in our HDR days. It's great for panoramas. It's great for focus stacking, which is very simply, before you shoot your multiple images, put your hand or a card or something, cover up the lens, and shoot a black screen like this top left image here. This was my hand. I didn't completely cover it. And after you shoot your multiple images, and you saw this finished product, which is the Eastern State Penitentiary. That was a 5-shot image, as you see here. After I shot my array of images, I put my hand back on the lens, shot the picture. So when you're going through your hundreds and hundreds of pictures after a shoot, you know that anything between those black spots is a string of images that are going to be used for either HDR, panorama, or focus stacking. So that's tip one. And tip two is you need to overlap each image like you do in panoramas. With panoramas, when you start moving the camera left to right or up to down, up or down, you want to overlap one image to the other, maybe 20%. It's no different with focus stacking. You want to overlap your areas of sharpness so that there's no blurry spots in your image, no blurry portions. So the more closely the focused distances are spaced out, it produces a more consistent and natural looking image. So for example, this example here on the far left, this is a 3-shot image. So one image is basically from here down. The next image is shooting in this range, but it's overlapping it. And in the far image, you'll see at the top, that's the area of sharpness. So these 3 images, when combined, the entire tie would be sharp because you've overlapped. So let's look at maybe how to capture images for a landscape image like this one, where you've got a portion of the image in the front, which is the fence, and you've got the structure in the back. Now, depending on the lenses that you're using and whatnot, you may be able to capture this in one image, but if it's simple and it's easy and it's quick, it's up for focus stacking, which is what we're going to do. So in landscape photography, there's really a couple of scenarios when you want to consider using focus stacking. And the first is when there's something close in the foreground you want to capture, and there's an interesting background that's perhaps further away. And the second, which we discussed, when you're using a telephoto lens in a landscape environment, which usually has a shallow depth of field, by capturing multiple images, by focusing in different areas, you can get the whole thing sharp. So here's what you need to do in a landscape environment. It's very similar to shooting macro, which we'll get into in a minute, but you really need a sturdy tripod. With HDR, I got to the point where I could really hand hold my 5 shots or 3 shots capturing HDR images, because the software has gotten better over time in aligning images. With macro, I've tried to do some macro handheld, very difficult for focus stacking. And landscapes, can get a little bit closer doing a handhold, but about 90% of my photography I like to do on a tripod because it has improved my photography by getting things much sharper. So the first thing is put your camera on a tripod, compose the image as you would using good compositional techniques with anything else that you shoot. And whether you're shooting HDR or panoramas or focus stacking, put all of your settings on the camera to manual. Do not use auto, because with the multiple images, you want the depth of field to be the same in all of the images. You want the light to be the same, so you don't want the exposure changing. So with multiple images, go to manual settings. And then if you have live view, and most cameras of course do, put it on live view, aim the focus point. And I always start in my focus stacking with what's closest to me, and then work back in the image by turning the ring on the lens. I start working my way back towards the back of the image to try to get everything sharp. So with live view, of course, you can zoom in using the plus minus of your camera, and then use the focus ring to get it to fine tune it, to get it as sharp as necessary, and then take the first exposure at that point. So without moving the camera or changing any settings in the camera, then move the focus point a little further back. It depends what you're shooting. Maybe you move it midway. In my macro photography, it takes more than 2 or 3 to get what I want, but start working your way back. So take that second exposure. And again, without changing anything, refocus on an object at the furthest point of the intended image. So keep shooting in landscapes. In landscapes, I can usually get what I want with about 3 images, one for the foreground, one for the mid, and one for the back for my landscapes. But if you have any doubts, and since you're out there anyway, if you want to take 5 shots, take 5 shots. Take 6 shots, take 6 shots. It's better to grab the shots when you're out in the field than to worry about it later. So for this particular image for landscape, there were 3 shots that were taken, one for the fence, one for the mid area in here for the bricks, and one for the front of the house. Now for macros, and we're going to demonstrate how this particular image was created in both Photoshop and Helicon. But the process of macros is basically the same. And macro, as we talked about, is probably the primary situation that you'll use it. Close-up photography, macro photography. It's the same process almost. Place the camera on a sturdy tripod, compose, determine the exposure, put everything in manual, go to live view. In macro, you don't have to do it as much, but if you need to zoom in a little bit, zoom in, fine tune it with the ring, focus ring, take the first exposure. And again, without moving the camera or adjusting any settings, start moving the ring and working your way further back into the image. And remember that with depth of field and macro, it's really measured in fractions of an inch instead of feet like landscape. So you will want to capture many, many images. Again, I think the most I've taken was 17 to 20 images for what I do. Well, actually, I've taken more, and I'll explain that in a minute, because what we're really talking about now is manual. Well, the camera I use now that I've upgraded to is the Nikon D850. And it has built into the camera. Many cameras today have this functionality where you can automate the whole process. So with the Nikon D850, this is actually the menu screen to how to do what they call focus shift shooting. So you would go into the menu, you would say how many shots you want. In this example, it's 100. The focus step width, and Nikon is funny with a lot of things. It's not like, and they probably can't do it, but it's not like each number is 1 inch or 1 foot. You have to learn and practice and experiment, but these numbers represent how wide, what's the depth of field of each shot that you're taking. So most of mine are 3 that I use for the Nikon. Interval, how many seconds, how much time you want between shots, and some other settings. Silent photography, it's basically the mirror up on it. So by telling the camera through the menu how many shots you want and how wide each one of those shots is going to be, once that's set up, you push the button once and it's going to shoot automatically those 100 shots, automatically changing the focus distance and then giving you 100 individual images for you to then move into post. So instead of moving the ring on the camera that I did for many years, and it wasn't pleasant all the time doing that, especially at Longwood, where depending on what I was shooting, I was bent over half the time looking in the viewfinder or using, the back screen and turning the ring. Here, you just set it up once, push the button, and away you go. You get your shots. So that's more automated. So in capturing the images, you can either do it manually by turning the ring. You can do it in camera if your camera has that function. Or, and this was available back when we started the HDR Club and got into focus stacking, there's computerized automated rail systems that will tie into your camera that can be tethered into a computer screen that is basically the same process. So if your camera doesn't have it, there are automated systems like that where you basically do the same thing. You say where to start the focus, where to end the focus, and how many shots you want. Push it once, and it will automatically take a shot and move the rail automatically a little bit closer to the camera. So those are the three ways of capturing images for focus stacking. It's capturing, aligning, and blending. So aligning, what it does, when you change the focal length of your shot, it actually changes slightly and alters. When you change the focus distance, it changes the alignment of the picture. And as a result, the angle of view also changes. So it's almost like zooming in and zooming out. So that after capturing the image in post-processing, the first thing you have to do is align all the pixels in all the different shots, which the software will do for you. And then once everything is aligned, then it goes through the blending process of picking all of the sharpest pixels from each of those images to give you the final product. So let's go through a software demonstration and you'll see how easy it is. And what we'll demonstrate is how to create this picture for focus stacking by using Adobe Photoshop and Helicon software. And then I'm also going to show you how to do an HDR image, because the process and software, and even on the capture side again, is very similar, but I want to show you how easy it is to do HDR. And with that, we'll use Photoshop again and Photomatix. And I've been using both Photomatix and Helicon for quite a long time. I recently got for HDR Aurora software, which I like a lot. Photomatix is less realistic. Aurora gives me more realistic HDR shots. So anyway, let's do a little demonstration. So we're in Photoshop now. So I'll start with Photoshop. The first thing you have to do is load your multiple images. So I will go into File, and I'm going to create a script to create a stack of my images. So it's File, Scripts, Load Files into Stack. Then you have to tell it what images you want. For that particular focus stacked flower, there were 8 shots that I took. So I load that in, say OK. It's going to create my different layers at this point in Photoshop. And the software I use can do both JPEG and your RAW files, but for the sake of the demonstration and the speed, I'm just going to show you the JPEG files tonight. So next, we have to highlight all the images that we want by using the Shift key, and then we'll go into Edit. So the first step in the process in Photoshop is to auto-align the layers. I always set it for auto, and I always uncheck these, but again, you could try it any way you want. Say OK. It's now aligning all 8 images, which was a very quick process. And the final step is to go back into Edit and then Blend, which again, it's going to look for the sharpest pixels on each of those layers to create your image. I'll tell it to, to do it on the stacked images, and I always check these two, seamless tones and colors and content-aware fill, transparent areas. So now it's blending them, and it'll just take a few seconds to give us the final product, or near final product, I should say. And there are differences between Photoshop and Helicon and some other software, third-party software that's on the market. This is really a straight align and blend, but there's no other fine tuning for HDR that can be done in Photoshop. So here it's taken all 8 images, aligned them, blended them, and as you can see, it's pretty darn sharp in here. It gave me all the detail I wanted. I knew when I shot this back then, I wanted all this detail. And I say it's near final because the last step for me is to bring it back into Photoshop and start taking out some of the imperfections, like you'll see a little black spot there and here. This little stem is a distraction to my eye, so I would probably remove that. A couple of these white spots, whatever you would want to do to fine tune it. Take this white spot out here, so I would go all around. But the key again is simplicity of capturing in 1 to 3 shots for landscape, maybe 1 to whatever, 10 shots for a close macro, and to easily blend it, align it in the software is pretty quick. So let's look at Helicon, doing the same thing in Helicon software, which you see right now. First step, of course, is to load your images. So I will open them. These are raw files. I had these in both. The first one in Photoshop, which actually processes it slower than Helicon, but I'm going to show you how quick it could be in Helicon. So I'm going to load these. And what I really like about Helicon 2 is down here you'll see there's different rendering methods. There's different way of doing this process, method A, B, C. It's basically different algorithms of how it's running through everything. And one thing that Helicon does, it does the aligning and the blending with one click, versus Photoshop, where there are individual steps of aligning and blending that you have to go through. So I've got it set on method A right now. My 8 images are loaded. I'll just say render. And you'll see on the right, it's going through each of the images fairly quickly. The block on the right is going to be the final image. And again, these are raw files. So it's doing it pretty quick. And that's all done. So again, if we wanted to look in on this image, going a little bit further, there we go. I'm going to start moving it around. Very sharp. If I didn't like, and I happen to like this one, but if I didn't like the outcome, then I would go into method B and just render it a second time very quickly and see if it gets a different outcome that I want. And if it didn't, I'd go into method C. And I've done that infrequently, but it still allows me to fine tune the whole process a little bit more. And there's even a couple of sliders that I've used, I would say maybe 20% of the time, to really fine tune some of the processes of aligning and blending. So that was awfully quick. Let me show you now HDR, how we would do that. I'm going to go back into Photoshop. For HDR, let me close this image out first, and we won't save it. So similarly, I have to load my images, but here I go into File, Automate, and at the bottom is Merge to HDR Pro, which is built into Photoshop. Similar screen, load my images. Let me go into HDR images, and I'm going to show you how to create this image from Acadia. So this was a 5-image HDR shot, and when I press OK here, it's actually going to do everything needed to create the final or near final HDR image. There's some fine tuning here we could do. Change gamma, no effect. Shadows, we'll do a little bit on the right. So anyway, you can do some fine tuning for HDR. Press OK, and it will produce the final product for you. So that's one way of doing HDR. No additional software to buy for either focus stacking or HDR, because you've got it in Photoshop if you have the software. Now I use a product called Photomatix, as I mentioned, and we'll do the same process here. When I open my images, these are the same 5. This allows me to just ensure that the exposure on each of the images is different, so it was a pretty good capture. And because I was in manual, of course, the ISO didn't change as the sun was setting, so we'll keep working through. I always check align source images and reduce chromatic aberrations. And now it's going to go through the process of creating the image. So whereas Photoshop had some sliders to customize a little bit what it merged, you'll see shortly that in Photomatix, you've got a ton of sliders on the left to customize. You've got different looks that you could play with. I'll kiddingly say anyone who uses an image like this, you know they're from the 60s or 70s. But the benefit to me of considering a third party is it just gives you additional control over the creation of the creative image you want to have. So again, there's just more fine tuning that we can do. I could have loaded this into Aurora. It would have given me maybe a more realistic look than this. And I also want to show you one last thing before we move on. I'm going to just exit out of here. I'm going to go back into Photomatix. Because the cameras are so good, the sensor in my D850, which I guess is about a 3 or 4 year camera maybe now in age, but the sensor's very good. So the dynamic range is very good. And I rarely shoot strings of, and I still do, but rarely shoot HDR to bring out detail in the dark and save detail in the highlights. But what I've learned to do is to take a single image and run it through HDR software. Let me show you this image here. Let me see, it's desktop. My wife and I just went back we were in Greece last year, and I just pulled this image out today. I actually hadn't worked on this image. So I knew going there that the staircases in Greece, so this is out of camera. This is a raw image. I'm going to actually run through, let me see if this is a raw image. This is, no, the JPEG. So the JPEG and the raw are the same, but I'm going to run the JPEG through Photomatix just to save us a little time. So sometimes I'll take a single image because with HDR, again, creatively, you'll have a different look and feel to your images. So let's go to Photomatix. I'm going to load this one single picture so you don't have to necessarily load multiple pictures. I'm going to take it through the same quick process. Now, of course, the JPEG image, just so you know, with my camera, I think was the JPEG image. It's a 46 megapixel image. I think it was an 11 megabyte JPEG. So anyway, here is a single image in Photomatics. And similarly, I can go through and it will just give me different looks that I can decide to work with or not decide to work with. Gives me the same fine tuning over here. And my point in just wanting to show you that very quickly was to really show that a single image also is fun to play with in some of the software for HDR. So with that, let's go back into our slideshow. We're almost at the tail end. So for both focus stacking and HDR, there's a variety of software out there. If you guys haven't tried this at all and you've got Photoshop, don't run out and buy anything, although you can get 30-day trials, I believe, on most of this software. I don't believe Lightroom can do focus stacking because it doesn't have layers. It can do HDR now. But anyway, here are some choices. Some of the bigger ones are Photoshop, Helicon for focus stacking, and this Serene Stacker and On1 have been out for a while. For HDR, there's Lightroom, Photoshop, Aurora, the NYX Good, and Photomatics. So as much fun as you can have with this, there are a couple of limitations which to me are not a great consideration, but it can be time consuming, the whole process of shooting 17 or 20 images. It can be, but it can give you the result that you want. Usually requires, or most of the time requires, that the subject matter be motionless because you're merging multiple images. Some of the software will take out ghosting and movement for you. And it may require a precision focusing device. I have a rail that I used for, which I still use for shooting flowers when I don't want to use my D850 in the automated process. So I'll just use a rail sometimes to still take pictures. And it does require specialized software. So if you're not using any software at all, these techniques really aren't for you. Before maybe we open it up for Q&A, I guess most of the pros that you would bring in to talk to you would talk about their seminars and workshops, but as proud member of MPA, just wanted to let you guys know we have this great program called Artist Spotlight. We've done 28 free webinars now. And on March 14th, we have Estras Suarez, who's a two-time Pulitzer Prize winning photographer who will talk on street photography and the decisive moment. And if you go into our webpage and go to the Artist Spotlight tab, you can register for free. And we do use Artist Spotlights to raise money for charity. So it's all voluntary, and we raise money for the Maryland Food Bank, where we've now raised, about $57,000 and helped provide over 160,000 meals. And we just added the named charity for the Alliance, which is that Flashes of Hope for kids with cancer. And we're starting to raise money for them here. But we usually use our Odyssey of Light webinar. So mark your calendars for this one too. It's going to be on Saturday, April 16th. We raise money during Odyssey strictly for Flashes of Hope, and we'll be putting tickets on sale. I'm hoping next week. We're still finalizing some testing processes that we've got. And we're going to be recording two great artists, Bob Christ, shot for National Geo, did work with Outdoor Photographer magazine, and also has been an award winner and a great presenter. He's done a lot of stuff for great courses. And I originally saw him up in B&H Optic. And Amy Vitale, who's National Geographic photographer, also a Nikon ambassador. Now, the street price for this is $35. And because you guys are members of the Alliance, there's a $20 discount. So the cost is $15. However, we've been blessed by having Nation's Photo Lab give everyone who buys a ticket $15, so it's really a net cost of zero if you take advantage of the printing capability that they have. So you can send your pictures away to Nation's Photo. We've got now 14 sponsors. There's one missing from this. We just got word from Estras Suarez because he does workshops. So he's going to be one of our gold sponsors along with the big guys, Nikon, Canon, Tamron, Hannah Mule, and some local folks, Nation's Photo Lab, Les Picker Fine Art, and Capital Photography Center as well. So we've got some great ones. And we're also going to have some raffles. You don't have to be there physically. If you're a ticket holder, you would be entitled to win some of these nice prizes. We have currently, we're still trying to get more, but we've got $1,400 in raffles. So with that, Christine, I don't know, and John, I don't know, you want me to stop sharing? How do you want to do the Q&A?
If you want to be on camera, we can put you on, or I'm asking for questions over on Facebook. And right now we don't have anyone, but I'm working on that.
I couldn't have done that good of a job. Let's keep it this way. They've seen so many beautiful flower pictures. I'd hate to put my face up there now.
Okay, here's one. Ron asks, Steve, does the focus rail reduce the distortion you get from turning the focusing ring on the camera? I can't recall.
No, you still will have to go through the alignment process. So no, it won't.
Does alignment help smooth out the distortion between images?
Smooth out the distortion. No, I don't think it impacts it at all.
Okay, that was the one question we got. And I try to give them a couple seconds to type in. They are a few seconds behind us usually.
And I hope tonight, at the very least, if you haven't tried these techniques, give it a shot. Like I say, you're not going to use them all the time, but they are going to come in handy for certain shooting situations. And hopefully you've seen just how quick the workflow process is of loading pictures and blending them. It just takes a minute or two to get a final product that you just couldn't get potentially any other way. So that was my goal, to hopefully say, hey, this is something that could add to my creative bag of tricks.
Okay, here's a few more questions. Debbie asks, basic question, how do you shoot an HDR photo in Nikon, or is the HDR part done in the software with a typical photo?
Well, two ways. One, you have to capture the images. So I usually predetermine how many images I think I need, and I go into bracketing. So I'll set up auto bracketing for either 3 shots, 5 shots, 7 shots. In the old days when we didn't know as much about HDR, we'd shoot some 9-shot HDRs. But today with the cameras, you should be able to capture everything you need with 3 shots. So put it on auto bracket. Even if you're shooting by hand, put it in continuous shooting. So you've got a bracket of 3, continuous shooting. And before you even put the bracketing on, put your hand in front of the lens, take a shot, and then put it into bracketing, put it into continuous shooting, frame it up, compose it, hold the trigger down, and it's going to fire off your 3 shots, and you're done. And then when you get back home, then you load those 3 shots into Photoshop or whatever software you're using to do the HDR.
Okay.
It's more ideal to put it on a tripod, but I think with today's software, they've made such improvements. And if you can, just hold this camera steady, and the purpose of the continuous shoot is you fire them off so quick today, the software will align those. So I actually very rarely do an HDR on tripod because I can nail it with handheld.
Okay. Over, Susan asks, did Estras Suarez do that talk on the decisive moment for MPA back in the summer of 2020, or is this a new topic from him?
No, this is a new topic for Estros. And for folks who didn't know, for if she's referring to our Odyssey of Light, Estros was in our second Odyssey of Light. We're now on our fifth, and he spoke on street photography, but it was just different techniques. So this is a totally different one.
JC asks, when shooting landscapes, what F number do you use?
Depends on the landscape. I usually don't go over f16 because of the diffraction issue. I'm real conscious of trying to get everything sharp. And again, if there's something in the foreground, I'll still keep it at f16, but I'll move the focus ring and focus on what's in the foreground, and then shoot my other shots and then merge it into focus stacking. But most of my shots, I try not to exceed f16 because I'm conscious of diffraction.
Kathy says, Steve, you did a great job in presenting. I am motivated to give it a try.
All right, Debbie.
Kathy.
I like it. Kathy. Go, Kathy.
Ed asks, and I believe you already answered this, but I don't want to skip it. With photo stacking feature on the camera, do you need a tripod?
Again, it depends what you're shooting. If it's a landscape, possibly no, but I do recommend in most cases for focus stacking to put it on a tripod or to put the camera on a ledge or a gorilla pod. But yeah, for focus stacking, I do recommend it. For macros, it's almost essential that you have to use it for a macro focus stacking image.
Diane says, great presentation. Can't wait to try all of these.
All right.
And Michael Smith says, when using focus stacking with landscapes, do you tend towards a high f-stop, low f-stop, or mid-range?
Again, I'm usually on f16, maybe f8. I won't go usually any lower because it, of course, reduces my depth of field. So for the lens I have, the sweet spot for sharpness, I believe, is f16 that I use mostly for landscapes.
And Jackie asks, for our novices, please clarify the difference between HDR and focus stacking, and can they both be done in the same image?
Okay, so HDR really deals with exposure because there are certain scenes. Think of a landscape where there could be some wooded areas with very dark shade, and then you've got bright light out in the sun. And it's hard to get detail in everything in one shot because, if your main subject is in the light, then it's going to make the forest even darker. So with focus stacking, it's going to take what you tell it is the ideal exposure. And then when you set up your brackets, it's going to take one or two more that are a little bit darker and a little bit more darker. It's going to take two more that's a little bit brighter or even a little bit more brighter than that. And those are the 5 images or 3 images, but it's different levels of brightness in an HDR capture that creates the HDR image. So it really impacts light and the ability to bring out detail in low light areas, as well as to bring out detail in your highlighted areas as well. Focus stacking deals strictly with sharpness. So really, because you want to put everything in manual, when you're turning the focus ring on the lens, starting at the front, what's closest to you, and working your way back, it just deals with getting everything sharp in the picture. I believe the answer to your last part is, can you use both in the same picture? I've tried it. I've been told you can. It takes a lot of work because you really have to think through how you're going to come up with, how do I want to say it? Image at a certain exposure and a certain sharpness and move back. I think it can be done. I think it's very difficult to do, though. So I wouldn't necessarily try it.
Scott says, thanks, Steve, and you kept technique from becoming the subject. And Ron says HDR and focus stacking really make you think through the image production. Not a lot of room for spray and pray. Really nice job of making this accessible.
Perfect. Thank you, guys.
And that was the last comment I had. Let me make sure there's no more questions. And I want to remind everyone to join us next week for our, what was it? It was for our photo share and discuss with Ron. And we will let you know what's going to happen on March 10th. Debbie says, this was great. Thank you. So I want to thank you very much, Steve, for joining us tonight. And we will see everyone next week.
And let me thank you again for inviting me. It's always great to come back to the Arundel Camera Club. Thank you guys for your support of MPA as well. So everybody have a nice night and stay safe and healthy out there.
Thank you so much, Steve, and thank you to everyone for joining us tonight, and we'll see you next week. Good night.